make some national translations from what I'm talking about to the various contexts, of course. What I'm going to talk about is, I'll start in some very general youth perspectives, really, which I don't know, you might recognize, you might not. We can discuss that later, but I'll start off with some sort of very general sociological perspective on youth, because as C said this morning, motivation within classrooms also are affected by wider tendencies of a more cultural and sociological shape. So that's what I'll do, and then I'll sort of sum into the question of motivation and how to work with it, which is then sort of I will unfold and unwrap what I just briefly mentioned within the debate just a minute ago. And then I will ask you some questions and raise some questions for debate afterwards, as Noemi said. And that's basically it. And you, in case, if there's something, while I'm talking now, there will be time for debate afterwards, but if there is something you don't understand or it doesn't make sense or whatever, then really don't hesitate to stop me on the way, because you might not be the only one not understanding what I'm talking about or wanting to have something developed on. So please, please, please tell me. Okay, some of these broad tendencies, I will talk about a few of them. First, which is very similar to what we talked about, that we see in Denmark as an increasing trend, and I know for sure that it's the same in the UK, is that we see fast tracking, tests, and performance and focus on the educational system as a sort of broad general picture, which is, and that creates a what we could call a performance culture, and to put it sort of very roughly, to say that educational system has always had a performance culture, because it has always been a question of finding out who's going to do what in our society. So that's not a new thing at all. But there has always been a balance between that and a learning culture. And those two elements, in a way, has to be balanced. I will get back to that later. And what we see is that this balance, in a way, it's getting increasingly out of balance, because we're pushing. It's moving these years. So, and I was pleased to hear about the OECD intentions, but there is a huge discussion of what happens between the intentional level, which I think is not to be understated. That's very important. But there is also a level of when it gets operational and when it gets sort of then tends to pressure this one. And what we see the young people reacting with is that it is actually on a daily basis challenging the togetherness, because it gives also to give a specific example, which has to do also with dropout and with school leaving, is that the togetherness, groups of togetherness that is created constantly in a school setting. It's created socially, and it's created also in the classes, in groups, and how it works. What that tends to happen here is that this, the performance culture seems to infiltrate these groups and makes it more likely that you want to work with the others. And what my observations in classroom show that the kids tend to increasingly sort of put themselves in a level, niveaudeling, what would you call that? They level themselves out even beforehand. So the disengaged young people, they will tend to withdraw, to not be part of this, what do I want to be with, and all the others tend to group themselves with the ones that are also motivated. So motivation becomes also sort of, I want to work with the other motivated kids. I don't want to work with the non-motivated kids. So they seem to get excluded in a way. That is one general tendency. Another one is that there is a rapid societal and labour market changing communication and knowledge forms, which was a bit what I was talking about before. Is it has one dimension which is that it's very hard to predict competencies that are needed in the future, and diffuse future horizons. And it's a long project. We've had research projects on motivation where the last parts now we're looking at highly motivated kids, which some of them have actually felt very excluded in school. They are motivated towards all different things, the kids we're looking into. And what it shows is that they actually seek competencies which are not the competencies given in school. Mm-hmm. They seek, and we try to look upon them as sort of trendsetters of where we're moving, and they actually look towards authenticity, what they really want. They want to be educated in something that they find is real, that has to do with real life. This being at school and doing it, just for preparation, just for practicing, and then waiting until you're prepared to get into the real life. They don't seem to have that endurance in a way. They want to get the real stuff now. And a lot of them say, like, why should I learn to make a web shop in school when I can do it for real? Why is school so boring? Because it doesn't make me really do it. So there is this, yeah.
Could you give some more examples?
They want to feel that, in a way, it has to do with the fact that they seem not to want to be young people sat in a position where they're waiting to be part. They want to be heard. They want to be acknowledged as grown-ups that are doing things for real. So they want to have, in school, they want to do the things for real. They want, if they have to write a newspaper, for instance, they want it to be published. They want to interview, not each other, but they want to interview experts or real people, or, they want to have, now I'm saying they as a very generalized thing, but there is a huge longing for wanting, they actually, and some of them think they have already, and it gives a very divided picture. Because what we see is that some of these young people, they tend to think that already quite low age, 12, 13, they tend to already think, some of them, I don't have what is needed in this system and on the labour market. I might as well just withdraw. That's what some of them do. And the others say, oh, I already have what is needed. I can already use myself. I can just make my own YouTube session, and then I will get followers, and then I will be a success, and then I will start earning money, and some of them leave school because they. So we have like this huge diversity, and everything sort of makes it happens younger and younger. I don't know.
Starting down school. Making a business as a 15-year-old.
Exactly, yeah. Because they don't need this school thing. They don't need to wait. So both situations, both are young, one extreme, counting oneself out of everything because I don't have what's needed. I might as well just, hang out with my friends, or maybe I don't have any, maybe I'll just, withdraw and I'll play computer games. Or the other ones, wanting to actually start earning money now, making their own business or whatever. Both of them, it's a way of dealing with labour market and grown-up life in a very early age. And in a way it is, I'm not talking about it now, but I could give a whole lecture about changes in what happens between, not generation, but what happens with that we are in a way, in a broader sense, maybe going towards not having something called youth. that youth is disappearing. Either either you look upon it as it's taking over everything, it takes over childhood and adulthood, or you could say actually adulthood is actually starting at a very earlier point. Yeah, I could talk a long time about that. I don't think I will, because and also what we see is that these knowledge forms that I talked about before, I really see, and I you know, this is me as I cannot document that research-wise, I cannot, but it's a sociological sensation that proper knowledge as the one we gather in school, that builds upon, I always talked before, this classical knowledge and concept of knowledge. This concept of knowledge is, I think, we've just seen the beginning of the pressure that we'll be under. And I think it's pressured from so many sides. It's pressured Donald Trump in that respect, but it's also challenged. I was at this session and I was in a debate with a politician, and I presented some results from a research project. And after I presented the result, then the politician says, I disagree. And I was like, but okay, I'll just try again. I'm presenting some result of a research. I can tell you the methods and whatever, and I totally disagree. That's not how I see it. So that's another same kind of challenge. And then you have the challenge at the doctors. Someone coming at the doctors or the teacher saying, well, I don't think that's relevant. Oh yes, it's relevant. No, it's not relevant. I had a similar example of the one C had with history. I had this interview with this girl, she was really sweet. She said, but I really, really don't understand why we should be taught history because it has happened already. I was like, yeah, okay, you got a point. Well, or not. But I saw her, I mean, she thought about it and she thought, yeah, I don't know how I ended up there. Yeah. Okay. You stop me if I have a huge tendency of thinking very broadly, and you stop me in case it doesn't make sense, okay? You don't say anything and I don't trust you to stop me, but you will, yeah? Okay. This one changes in the relational grammar between grown-ups and children. This is not research we've been doing in my research center. I'm drawing upon a culture, so what we call a culture sociologist called Mats Trundman, which is from Sweden, and I've written about it with some other people in a book. And it's actually a third tendency, which has to do actually not with the educational system. It affects the educational system and it affects young kids at risk very much, but it actually has to do with a cultural change which is about the relationship, or he's calling the relational grammar as the grammar amongst generations and within relations. And the point is that these relations and the grammar that actually decides whether you are sitting still and listening or walking around, or the grammar that decides how we interact with each other.
It's norms.
Norms. Yeah, it's norms of exactly. Yeah.
Etiquette.
Yeah, that's what it is. And this is changing because he's pointing at three, and I'll just do that very briefly, but three historical changes. One is that young people, kids and adults, or teachers, actually have the more life worlds in common. This is actually something very different from what Thomas C. is saying. His argument is, and I agree with that, is that the life worlds are becoming much more similar. We are on Facebook together, swapping clothes, listening to the same kind of music, far more in, and now I'm talking about, which is important in terms of the young people at risk, now I'm talking about general normal norms, average norms, and not, because there are families that has different norms that clashes with this. But this is a general picture, and then I'll get to the young people at risk. Because the general norm is that we are much more the same platforms. We share much more same kinds of life worlds.
Does that depend on the demographic of the teaching profession?
It could do, but it actually goes above, because it describes more a general sort of historical movement. Whereas you would have, some generations ago, you would have a grown-up world of its own, and you would have the kids having their own world, you know, outside the house, on the streets, with groups of peer groups, totally isolated from each other. What would happen today in most families, or in most, is that these life worlds will be much more intermingled, and we will know much more of each other. You will have the newly divorced mother sitting talking with the daughter about relationships. I will give you an example now. Do I have time for that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll give you an example. And this is, I haven't made research on this, so it's a totally private example, and it's not scientifically anything else. And you might, I think you might think I'm totally screwed up, but I will tell you anyway. I have a lot of kids. One of them, one of my sons, he was changing school at one point, and he had this girlfriend in the school he was leaving, and he wanted to change to another high school. And then this girlfriend got really offended, and she didn't want to be together with him anymore. And then he was, very sad about this. You shouldn't hear it. Okay. And he was very sad about this, and then he wanted to write her a letter to make it good. So straight away he took his computer to write, he wanted this letter to be handwritten, because it should be really, a proper letter, and it should be handwritten. And then he took his computer to write a klæde,
A draft.
yeah, he wanted to write a draft, but he did it on the computer, not the other way around. So he wrote this long draft on the computer, and then after having written the draft, he took a paper and he started writing this letter in his hand, and he wrote 2 lines, and then he had cramps in his arm because he's totally not used to writing in hand. And he was like, "Oh, you have to help me, Mom." And I was like, "Help you? What are you talking about? It's your love letter, I'm not helping you." And then he kept on a bit more, and he got cramps all over the place, and he couldn't write anymore. And eventually, I was sat there writing this love letter.
No, don't tell this other places. Don't tell it to anybody else.
I said it, I warned you before, you think. Anyway, I draw the line, I will not sign this. I will not sign this letter, I will sign it. And it looked really stupid because it had my handwriting and a bit of his. Anyway, the whole story is just to tell you, this what happens here, and I'm really now putting it into a sociological question, and not a psychologically screwed up relationship between me and my son, but as a sociological phenomenon. I think what this story can be an example of, and maybe it's a bit, but is that to him it's not dangerous to have me seeing his love letter. That's not at all what's puzzling him. He is puzzled about the fact that he wants, his attention is to the fact that he wants to have a handwritten letter. He wants to handle this relational togetherness he has with this girlfriend thing. But the relationship to the grown-up, the parent here, the border between the generation is not drawn, and my argument would be this situation would not have been possible a couple of generations ago, and maybe not in other cultures, because the border, the limit wouldn't have been drawn there. There would have been a very solid limit as to what you want the grown-up world to know about and the young people's world to be part of. But here, the limit, it's not there.
Yeah.
And we see in the international literature on what constitutes adulthood and youth, we see that it's more, a sense of adulthood is more constructed upon the idea of autonomy. So if I had interfered here in this situation and said, "I don't think you should write this letter because I don't think it should be a girlfriend word," then there would have been a limit. I couldn't do that. I can write his letters, I can be part of his inner feelings and talk with him about it, but I cannot go in and take any decisions, because that's where the adulthood, and that was the line is drawn. So it gives, back to the school context here, what this does, this change of grammar or norms, relational grammar, it gives some completely different lines to be drawn between the teacher and the pupil. And it gives a much more sort of, you have to sort of, as a teacher, in a way, have a daily struggle to win this relationship, to win this. It's a way, it's a closeness, but it doesn't need to be too close. So winning this relationship, and what is also important in this change is that they give the ability. It does in Denmark maybe, the ability for parents and grown up to actually play a different and in a way also a bigger role in young people's lives, because they become someone it becomes like a counselor, someone you can debate, discuss. And that represents a development. You can think about it, you can say a lot of things about that, but if we're looking at disadvantaged youth at risk, it creates another thing. It creates that actually the importance of your inheritance, which has always been there, is actually being enforced. So if you don't have this kind of parents with you, you're not brought up to have, you're not brought up in a relationship where you have a non-authoritarian, very egalistic, what do you call it, relationship. Then you're actually really having problems. Can you follow me?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. You do have problems sort of having been brought up not just with books, but you're not being brought up with a way of interacting where authority is a new thing. Authority is not there. Authority is constantly being debated, constantly being decided who will take it here, who will decide now. Constantly you are brought up to actually take decisions for yourself in a relationship with others. And if you don't learn this at home, because you grow up in a different kind of home, then you're actually having bigger problems entering the school system that you would actually have previously. And in terms of the meeting with the general group of students in school, it becomes, school C talked about it, but he reasoned it in a different way, but it becomes much more a daily matter of discussing what should we actually learn and why. Because the authority is not there. Because it's the relational grammar that actually becomes part of the process of which you decide what should we learn or not. Okay, so these are the general, sort of the framing for looking further into motivation. How much time have I got?
No. 2.
Okay. So what we see, this is actually just repeating what I said in this, that we see many different signs of motivational challenges in a way. And the disconnected is how we think of motivational problems, classic in a way. But it's as much this, so it can look very differently really. Yeah. Okay, then we conducted this research, and are you interested in the methods and the groups and stuff like that, or should I jump?
One moment. Research question. Research question. We have to know what before you go on.
Yeah, they've asked questionnaires.
Yes.
We've
the research question. How
okay,
can we understand what?
In the final years of compulsory education, and how can we support young people's motivation for learning and further education in the final years of compulsory education? And we have it's been a huge project, so there's a lot of
one school.
Okay, so this is like, this is how normally you perceive motivational problems. And basically what I want to show you is that we ended up really leaving this classical, and it became much more complex in a way than this normal situation. So we actually made a move theoretically and empirically from a thought where a predominant psychological and individual view on motivation, where in this view you would have motivation as something within the individual, a personal trait or characteristic, and also something, a quantitative measure. You can be either highly motivated or not motivated as a quantitative thing. But as Caroline Jackson talked about, we increasingly think of it as a intentional matter and not a quantitative. It's the quality of. I'll get back to that. And also something which is also in the EU. She was very sympathetic. The woman, I can't remember her name.
Yuri Belfani.
Belfani, that's it. Yeah. But looking into the EU documents, there is a lot of talk about educational challenges linked to young people's disengagement and lack of motivation. And the understanding of motivation, which is carried forward in this here, it's to a high degree individualized. And it's very much a question of groups of students that are challenged, and not actually the meeting between the students and the context which is challenged. So it's possible to actually really rethink some of these documents and thinkings according to what I'm trying to present you. Okay. So what we in what we understand, we would have some young people. They would have some experiences, some motives, some meaning making. If I took you as an example, you would come into this room or to this conference, and you would have some expectations, some experiences, some meaning, whatever, and then something would happen. There'll be a school, a classroom culture, there will be togetherness on this conference, blah, blah, blah. There will be something happening here. And this meeting could create either motivation or it could create demotivation. That's something which is happening here. It will not be possible to actually tell or point out you to be motivated or not motivated. That will happen. So, I'm standing here. So, in this sense, motivation is not a prior condition for learning. It actually changes around. We often think as motivation as a prior condition for learning. It actually turns it around and it says rather it should be viewed as a result of a school activity as a learning. So actually motivation is rather a result of learning than a precondition of learning. And it gives focus to young people's orientation and motive for disengagement in learning activities, for both engagement and disengagement in a way. And it gives focus on what motivational orientation dominates in the learning context where young people participate. So in the situation where the young people do engage, what is actually at stake, what is actually happening there. Which motives and practices are supported in educational context and which are deemed out.
Is that pedagogy, different pedagogies you're talking about?
Yeah, in a way it is. Yeah, it's not a specific pedagogy, but it's a thinking, it's a way of thinking about a pedagogical method. And I wish I had time for, I'll just give you, no, I won't. Just discussing myself. So these are what we found in this age group. I've done another study where I've used the same way of working with motivation, and I've done that amongst young people aged 18 to 29 or 30 that are unemployed and are in sort of some schemes in order to be ready for education. And I have, there is an English article that has just been published in Journal of Youth Studies, if any of you is interested, I just had it published right now, so I haven't any. It's in Journal of Youth Studies, and it's called Remotivating. I can't even remember what it's called. Remotivating something. I think it's on the front page if you go into this Journal of Youth Studies. I think it's on the front page because it's just been published a week ago or something. Anyway, there is an article about that group of young people. Now I'm going back to the 13 to 16-year-old normal, average group of people, young people. And these were the 5 dominating orientations at play. Knowledge, motivation, relational, mastery, performance, and involvement. I'll now give you an example of each of them to explain them more in depth. So knowledge, motivation, it's, okay, I'll read these out first. It's this boy who says, I like physics and chemistry and stuff about voltage and electricity and such. It's just the way the world is built. Then I find it interesting to learn. And another one said, I know one thing, that in the old days black people were not right. I think you can learn to see what it is that was like in old days. I like things better now. This guy, he's another ethnic minority, doing shit in school, but he could make, here in this situation, his knowledge motivation was actually activated because it was a subject about black people in America under the Civil War, and he could suddenly identify with something. So actually what created this knowledge motivation within him was actually the possibility of making a connection in a way between himself, between an interest and something that has been taught in the lesson. So what is actually creating this knowledge motivation is curiosity, exploration, preoccupation with the outside world, not as me as part of the world. So it's in a way also a bit different from what C is saying. C is talking about these inner worlds as something which is, totally besides everything. In here, I would say it's more a question of it's where it mingles,
He's mirroring.
He's mirroring, exactly, it involves a mirroring, and then it can be linked to something which I don't know about already. I can learn about the world, and I experience that the world is opening to me, and that gives a motivational kick, in a sense, because you suddenly see and wow, I didn't know that. But it's challenged. There can also be produced demotivation in this respect, and that's created when the kids are not able to link what they're being taught and their inner peer shit, the knowledge they have. There is no connection, and if there is no connection, the gap is too big, then demotivation is created. So if you're sitting here and you're thinking, I don't get a clue of what she's talking about, then demotivation would be produced in this situation. Yeah. So and the next one, it's relational motivation, togetherness, you could say. Yeah, I'll just read it out. There's missing some of it. Liz, the teacher, she's also good. A bit more on the personal level, where you talk about personal stuff, things at home and such. We gain more respect for them. If they become serious, then we want to listen. Because if you have a good relationship to them, then you want them to become upset about, then you don't want them to be upset about us not listening. So you're actually listening. Yeah, we had an example earlier on. And another down here, this is the relational dimension, which is individual. It's to the teacher. But the relational motivation has 2 dimensions. It has the individual to the teacher, but it also have a collective dimension to the other pupils, which is here. How much do friends matter for school life? And then it was a group interview, and the level of a lot, and one says everything. Yeah. So in this room, there will both be a relational motivation in terms of your relation to me, but there will also be a relational motivation concerning the group. Do you know the others? Do you feel strange? Do you feel comfortable? Whatever, there'll be different two angles to it. So it involves sense of belonging, meaningful relations, classroom culture, blah, blah, blah. It's challenged, and this is really important in the discussion, to me anyway, in the discussion of togetherness, is that relational motivation cannot and must not stand on its own. It's so important to link it with vocational academic subject matters. And it's important to balance and focus on the relation and the academic content. And I'll give you an example from one of the observations I made in this project. This girl, I followed her outside school before, and she was like, I really, really love school. I mean, school is fantastic. She was really into school, and I built up this picture of a girl that was like highly motivated. And then eventually I go with her in the class, and she is like, you know, like this. And I was like totally surprised. And then she says, oh, because she really liked the teacher. She was called Astrid. She said, oh, Astrid, why should we do something now? Should we just have a good time? Do we really, really have to work? You know? So she had a high degree of relational motivation, but absolutely no knowledge motivation, no any of the other motivation, I will come in. Nothing but the relational. And you can actually get, if you look at many in Denmark, now I'm slightly generalizing, but I think I have a fairly good sort of outset to do it. If you look at early dropout, and also a lot of the school options that are there, in Denmark at least for early dropouts, a lot of what is actually happening is that they are taking out of the school because they have a lot of absenteeism, because they don't turn up, because they're mastery motivation, which is motivation that is reached and gathered because you have experiences of learning. So you can take, if you take that girl I presented before, this girl with the German classes, that she's very relationally motivated to school. She loves being in school, and she loves the teacher. She hates German. She might actually react, oh, but German, I can never learn German. And we know it in maths, for instance, very often. Maths, I just don't understand. You know that reaction, yeah? It's just not me. I cannot do it. And then you have to start slowly with this mastery motivation. You might not be interested in the subject, you might hate the teacher, but you can actually experience to have a progression in terms of learning. Yeah, I'll just read. Grades means a lot. Well, it's a nice feeling when you move up. Then you become really happy, like, yeah, I've become better than this. And here, what does it mean to be interested in the subject? Yeah, it's for instance, when we have German and English, which I'm not so good at, it's harder for me, so I'm just not motivated with these subjects. I try as well as I can to tag along. Sometimes it's fine, other times I just want to get away. So this is what can happen, you know, if it doesn't work. But it can actually, you can have this sense of progression. And the thing is, it is very important here that the sense of progression doesn't get reduced to a question of marks and grades. That it also, that teachers also sort of broaden their language in terms of talking about knowledge and progression, not only in terms of have you get a higher grade, because a lot of the kids actually do get disappointed when they don't raise their grades, even though they might feel they've learned something. Then this feeling sort of gets, you know, devaluated, because they cannot always go up a grade, because maybe they've done a bigger effort, but it hasn't yet paid off in terms of a bit higher grade. So it's important, and we've found that the kids tend to have like a quite narrow language for learning. Their language for learning is, what grade do I have? And the teachers, to some extent as well. Okay, so this is about progression, and it's also about self-efficacy. It's about also, do I have a perception of myself as someone that is able to learn? It's the Bandura
Yeah.
theory of, and that is actually really important. Do I think of myself as someone that will never learn math?
Oh.
Then I probably never will enter a learning situation with math because I'll just say it's not me, I cannot do it. Then you don't have any, the self-efficacy is very low. Okay, and the last two ones, performance motivation. And you know, I've talked about performance before as something negative. Here it's not negative. And there is a lot of motivation within performance. If I said to you, when you leave this room, I will just test you if you can write these 5 motivational orientations. I'll just check if you can do it. That would instantly do something to your motivation.
I get out now.
Huh? Yeah, you would go away now.
Yeah.
No, I don't want that.
If you
Yeah.
test me.
So you know, you can as a teacher really make a quick fix on motivation, and it works. It really works. So it's a very efficient form, but it also has some challenges. I'll get back to that. But what I want to say is that it has very good elements to it because you can also use it in groups. It has a lot of energy that you want to compete with yourself or you want to compete with others, and you want to perform. Like this one saying, I like being known as a smart one, a competition person. Some of us have gotten this image that we're smart, and then people come and ask us to help them sometimes. And here, I also think in class when you ask the question, then you can be afraid of giving a wrong answer. But here, in a graduate school, there are no right and wrong answers. There are only different right answers, so it's much easier. So this is, you know, taking up. But so social comparison and competition, preoccupation with performing. Yeah. But the challenges here is that both there can become imbalances. I will say that near us. There can become huge imbalances in between these motivational orientations. And if there's too much performance motivation, then probably the knowledge motivation will get squeezed, and maybe also the relational one. And also what we see is something we call school exhaustion. And school exhaustion is actually when you've been in a competition and you've performed, you know this feeling of, you can't anymore. You get exhausted, basically. Yeah, so it's academically strong students who push themselves, and then it's also demotivation because it's students who struggle to live up to the demands and expectations in the school that get even more demotivated. And then the last one is the involvement motivation. I'll just read it out as the first thing. We were organized in groups and in assignments. It said that we were to figure it out ourselves. We were to make some tests within radioactive stuff. I thought it was fun because we had to do it ourselves and solve the problem and learn about it as a group. Another one, we were making a short film and commercial